The billionaire stormed his ex-wife's home to mock her, then was frozen when he saw a newborn baby. She never planned to tell him about their baby. For 3 years after their divorce, Madison Reed had meticulously rebuilt her life without Nathaniel Kingston, the man who had systematically crushed her confidence and dismissed her dreams. But on a snowy December morning, her carefully guarded secret came screaming into the world when her billionaire ex-husband stormed into her home, only to freeze in shock at the sound of a newborn's cry. The baby was his, conceived during one night of weakness when a coastal storm had trapped them together in Savannah. And now, standing in the doorway of the nursery, the color draining from his face as he stared at the infant with his unmistakable features, Madison realized some secrets can't stay buried forever. What would you do if the person who once crushed your self-worth suddenly had the legal right to be part of your life again? How far would you go to protect not just your heart, but your child's future? Stay with me to discover how one tiny baby forced 2 broken people to confront the truth they'd been running from for years. Madison Reed stood at her kitchen window, absently stirring honey into her tea as she watched the first snowfall of December drift across her small backyard garden. The white flakes softened the edges of the raised beds she'd built last spring, beds now dormant, waiting for the promise of another season. At 35, Madison had finally found peace in these quiet moments. The modest Victorian home in Atlanta's historic district wasn't grand by any measure, but it was hers, bought with the proceeds from her successful interior design firm that had, against all odds, flourished after her divorce from Nathaniel Kingston 3 years ago. The sudden blare of a car horn shattered the tranquility. Madison glanced at her watch with a frown. 7:15 a.m. on a Saturday. Too early for visitors, especially in this peaceful neighborhood where most residents respected the unspoken weekend morning quiet. When the doorbell rang, an insistent, repeated pressing rather than a polite announcement, Madison set down her tea with a sigh. Through the frosted glass panels flanking her front door, she could make out a tall, masculine silhouette. The moment she turned the deadbolt, the door pushed open with force that nearly knocked her backward. "Where is he?" Nathaniel Kingston demanded, striding into her foyer without invitation. Madison steadied herself against the wall, momentarily stunned by the intrusion. Her ex-husband filled the space with his imposing presence. 6 feet of tailored charcoal suit, cashmere overcoat, and cold fury. The financial media called him the Wolf of Peachtree Street, a self-made billionaire whose investment firm had transformed downtown Atlanta's skyline. She called him the mistake she'd spent 5 years trying to forget. "Good morning to you too, Nathaniel," she said, fighting to keep her voice level. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Nathaniel's steel-gray eyes scanned her living room with open disdain. "Cut the pleasantries, Madison. Where are you hiding him?" "Hiding who?" She crossed her arms, keeping her distance. 3 years since their divorce had been finalized, and still, his proximity made her pulse quicken. Not from lingering attraction, but from the body's memory of stress, of walking on eggshells, of never quite measuring up. "Don't play innocent." He moved further into her home, uninvited. "Your new benefactor. The mystery man who's been funneling money into that little hobby business of yours." Madison's confusion gave way to indignation. "My hobby business grossed $2.3 million last year without any benefactor, mystery or otherwise. Not that my finances are any of your concern anymore." Nathaniel snorted, running a finger across her bookshelf as if checking for dust. "Please, interior design for middle-class homes in East Atlanta? That doesn't generate the kind of capital you've been throwing around." "What are you talking about?" "The downtown office space you just leased. The feature in Southern Living. The sudden ability to outbid Kingston Developments for the Westmoreland renovation project." His voice hardened with each example. "You couldn't manage a household budget when we were married, Madison. You expect me to believe you've become a business genius overnight." The casual cruelty of his dismissal stung, despite the years and therapy sessions between then and now. Madison took a steadying breath, reminding herself that his opinion no longer defined her worth. "I've always been capable, Nathaniel. You just preferred me dependent." She gestured toward the door. Now if you've finished insulting me in my own home, I have a business to run. All by myself, shocking as that may be to your enormous ego. Instead of leaving, Nathaniel stalked closer, invading her personal space with practiced intimidation. Who is he, Madison? One of my competitors? Is that what this is about? Using you to get to me? Not everything is about you, she said, refusing to back away despite the rapid beating of her heart. There is no he. I built my business through talent, hard work, and clients who appreciate quality design that doesn't require an 8-figure bank account. Nathaniel opened his mouth to respond when a faint sound from upstairs caught both their attention. The soft, unmistakable cry of a newborn. His expression transformed from anger to shock in an instant. What was that? Madison felt the blood drain from her face. Not now. Not like this. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. I think you should leave, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The crying grew louder, more insistent. You have a baby? Nathaniel's voice was strangled, his composure cracking. Is that what this is about? You've been hiding a child from me? Before Madison could stop him, Nathaniel was taking the stairs 2 at a time, following the sound. She rushed after him, panic rising in her throat. Nathaniel, stop. You have no right to. He pushed open the door to what had once been a spare bedroom. The space had been transformed into a serene nursery, walls painted a soft sage green, a white crib positioned beneath the window where morning light filtered through gauzy curtains. Inside the crib, a tiny baby with a shock of dark hair squirmed beneath a light blanket, face reddening with each cry. Nathaniel stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the infant as if he'd seen a ghost. Madison pushed past him, going straight to the crib. She lifted the baby with practiced ease, cradling the small body against her shoulder and making gentle shushing sounds. It's okay, Eliza, she murmured, patting the baby's back. Everything's okay. Nathaniel remained motionless. His usual confidence evaporated. How old? He finally asked, his voice oddly hollow. 3 weeks, Madison answered, not meeting his eyes as she soothed the now quieting infant. 3 weeks, he repeated, his calculating mind visibly working through the implications. And 9 months before that? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. Madison felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she held Eliza closer, protectively. Yes, Nathaniel, she said quietly. Do the math. His face paled as the realization struck him. 9 months ago. That would be March, Madison finished for him. The week of the Savannah Heritage Project. Recognition dawned in his eyes. The Savannah Project, when their professional paths had crossed unexpectedly. When 3 years of carefully maintained distance had collapsed during one storm-drenched weekend in a historic hotel where they'd both sought shelter from a coastal deluge. One night of weakness, of remembering what had once been good between them before everything fell apart. The baby is mine, he said. Not a question but a stunned statement of fact. Madison looked down at Eliza, at the tiny face that already showed hints of her father's strong features. The same dark hair, the same determined set of the jaw, even in infancy. Yes, she admitted softly. She's yours biologically, but she's mine in every way that matters. Nathaniel moved closer, almost in a trance, his eyes never leaving the infant. Why didn't you tell me? The question held no accusation, just genuine bewilderment that caught Madison off guard. She'd prepared herself for anger, for legal threats, for the cold, calculating response she'd come to expect from the man he'd become. Not this quiet confusion. Would it have mattered? She countered. You made it very clear during our marriage that children weren't part of your plan, that your empire was your legacy. I didn't want Eliza to be an unwanted obligation. So you just decided for me? His voice hardened slightly, more familiar territory. Determined I had no right to know about my own child? I decided to protect her, Madison said firmly, and myself, from the inevitable legal battles, from being tied to you for the next 18 years through a child you never wanted. You don't know what I want, Nathaniel said, a strange intensity in his voice. You don't know who I am anymore, Madison. The statement hung between them, undeniably true. 3 years of separation, of building separate lives. The man standing before her was both intimately familiar and a complete stranger. Eliza squirmed against Madison's shoulder, making small fussing sounds that signaled hunger. The ordinary needs of a newborn grounding this extraordinary moment. I need to feed her, Madison said, her voice steadier than she felt. Nathaniel didn't move from the doorway. We need to talk about this. Yes, Madison agreed, surprising herself with her calmness. But not now. Not like this, with you barging into my home making accusations. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty from a man known for his unwavering confidence. When? Tomorrow, Madison decided. Come back at noon. I'll have made arrangements for someone to watch Eliza, so we can talk properly. Nathaniel nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the baby. She has my mother's eyes, he said softly, an observation so unexpected it made Madison's throat tighten with emotion. Yes, she whispered. I noticed that too. A moment of connection, fragile and fleeting, before Nathaniel straightened his shoulders, composure returning like a mask sliding back into place. Tomorrow at noon, then. He turned to leave, then paused at the nursery door. For what it's worth, Madison, I never thought your design business was just a hobby. I always knew you were talented. He hesitated, searching for words. I wasn't very good at showing it. The admission, small but significant, left Madison momentarily speechless. By the time she found her voice, he was already heading down the stairs, his footsteps fading. She looked down at Eliza, now blinking up at her with those distinctive Kingston eyes. Well, she murmured, that wasn't how I planned to introduce you to your father. The baby's tiny hand curled around her finger in response, a gesture of perfect trust that strengthened Madison's resolve. Whatever happened next, whatever Nathaniel decided to do with this knowledge, she would protect this precious life they'd created, even from the emotional whirlwind that was Nathaniel Kingston himself. Have you ever had someone underestimate your strength only to be shocked by what you've accomplished? Share your story of proving someone wrong in the comments below. The first time Nathaniel Kingston made Madison feel small was on their third date. She'd mentioned her dream of starting her own interior design firm someday, focusing on sustainable materials and accessible luxury. He'd smiled that charming, indulgent smile that would become all too familiar in their marriage. That's cute, he'd said, reaching for her hand across the table. But real estate development is where the actual money is. Maybe you could help choose fixtures for my properties instead. She'd laughed it off then, flattered by his interest, dazzled by his confidence. It was only the first of countless moments where he would subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, diminish her ambitions. Madison settled into the nursery's rocking chair, adjusting Eliza against her breast. As the baby nursed contentedly, Madison's mind drifted back through the years, trying to pinpoint when exactly she'd lost herself in Nathaniel's shadow. Their courtship had been a whirlwind, 6 months from that first meeting at a charity auction to the lavish wedding featured in Atlanta's society pages. Madison Reed, promising interior designer, marrying rising financial star Nathaniel Kingston. It had seemed like a fairy tale. The reality proved far different. You don't need to work such long hours, he'd say when she stayed late at the small design firm where she'd been building her reputation. I make more than enough for both of us. That color scheme is a bit adventurous for the guest bedroom, don't you think? He'd suggest, when she tried to express her creativity in their own home. Let's be realistic about your talents, he'd advise when she'd talk about striking out on her own. Most small businesses fail in the first year. Each comment delivered with that same smile. Concerned, protective, undermining. By their third anniversary, Madison had all but abandoned her professional aspirations, instead playing the role of the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties, attending charity galas, always impeccably dressed, always careful not to embarrass Nathaniel in front of his increasingly powerful associates. The day she realized she'd become a stranger to herself was the day she found the courage to leave. "I want a divorce," she told him one evening as he reviewed quarterly projections at the dining room table, barely glancing up when she entered. He'd looked at her then, truly looked at her for the first time in months. "Don't be dramatic, Madison. What would you even do without me?" The question, so casually cruel, so genuinely puzzled, had confirmed everything she needed to know. "I guess I'll find out," she'd replied. The divorce had been brutal. Nathaniel, unused to being denied anything he considered his, fought her on every point, dragging out proceedings, questioning her financial competence, suggesting she was emotionally unstable. It took 18 months and every ounce of Madison's determination before she walked away with enough to start over. Her maiden name restored and a modest settlement that she immediately invested in her dream. Madison Reed Design was born in a tiny rented office with second-hand furniture and one part-time assistant. 3 years later, it occupied a stylish downtown space with a staff of 8 and a growing reputation for innovative, accessible designs that didn't require a millionaire's budget. The journey hadn't been easy. There were nights she'd sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by fabric samples and business plans, wondering if Nathaniel had been right about her limitations. Moments when potential clients would learn of her connection to Kingston and either expect discounts because of her wealthy ex-husband or dismiss her as a dilettante playing at business. But each obstacle only strengthened her resolve. Each success, however small, reinforced the woman she was becoming, or perhaps had always been, beneath the layers of doubt Nathaniel had cultivated. Eliza had finished nursing. Madison gently shifted the baby to her shoulder, patting her back with practiced movements that still felt new. Just 3 weeks into motherhood, and already she couldn't imagine life without this tiny being who depended on her completely. Which was precisely why Nathaniel's sudden reappearance in her life terrified her so much. The storm that had brought them together in Savannah 9 months ago had been unexpected in every sense. Madison had traveled to the historic coastal city to pitch her firm for the Heritage Row renovation, a prestigious project that would put Madison Reed Design on the national map. She hadn't known that Kingston Developments was also bidding on the contract until she spotted Nathaniel across the hotel lobby. 3 years of carefully maintained distance collapsed in an instant. Their eyes met, recognition flared, and Madison had felt that old, familiar tightness in her chest, the body's memory of both attraction and anxiety. She turned away immediately, focusing on checking into the historic hotel where project bidders were being housed during the weekend presentations. If she could avoid him for 48 hours, she told herself, she could maintain the careful boundaries she'd established since their divorce. Then the coastal storm hit. Presentations postponed, travel halted, power flickering throughout the historic district. And somehow, inevitably, she and Nathaniel had found themselves in the hotel's candlelit bar as rain lashed against centuries-old windows. "You look good, Madison," he'd said, appearing beside her table with 2 glasses of expensive bourbon. "Success suits you." She'd meant to dismiss him, to maintain her hard-won independence. Instead, she'd found herself accepting the drink, drawn into conversation that flowed more easily than she would have expected after all that had happened between them. "Your firm is doing well," he'd observed. Not a question but a statement. "I've seen your work on the Riverside development." Madison had been surprised he'd noticed. "We're growing steadily." The Riverside project was a turning point, brought in several new commercial clients. "You always had an eye for spaces that could tell a story." There was something different in his tone, respect that hadn't been there during their marriage. One drink had become 2 as the storm intensified outside. Conversation had drifted from business to memories, not of their failed marriage, but of the times before, when they'd been young and ambitious, sharing dreams over cheap wine in Madison's first apartment. "Do you remember what you said to me the night we met?" Nathaniel had asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Madison smiled despite herself. "That your tie was hideous and undermining an otherwise decent suit?" He'd laughed then, a genuine laugh that transformed his face, softening the hard edges success had carved into his features. "And you were right. I burned that tie the next day. Yet you still asked me to dinner." A woman who noticed the tie rather than the bank account was worth pursuing. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, how that initial attraction to her authenticity had eventually given way to his attempts to reshape her. As the night wore on and the storm showed no signs of abating, the hotel had lost power completely. Staff distributed additional candles and blankets to guests stranded in common areas. The intimate lighting, the howling wind, the unusual circumstance of being trapped together. It all created a strange bubble outside of time, outside of their complicated history. "I was wrong, Madison." The words had come unexpectedly as they shared a bottle of wine brought by an enterprising bartender determined to keep serving despite the outage. "About so many things, but especially about you." She'd studied his face in the flickering candlelight, searching for the manipulation that had colored so many of his apologies during their marriage. Instead, she'd found something unfamiliar, genuine regret. "It's in the past," she'd said, not ready to offer forgiveness but too exhausted by old anger to sustain it in that moment. When he'd walked her to her room as the hotel generators finally kicked on around midnight, the air between them had crackled with unspoken possibilities. Madison had meant to say goodnight at her door. Instead, she'd found herself inviting him inside, drawn to this glimpse of the man she'd once loved before ambition and control had twisted him. For one night, they'd reconnected, physically, emotionally, in a way that felt both familiar and entirely new. In the candlelit darkness of that historic hotel room, with rain lashing against centuries-old windows, they'd found a temporary peace with their past. In the morning, clarity had returned with the sunshine. They'd parted with awkward politeness, both recognizing the night for what it was, an anomaly, a closure of sorts, but not a new beginning. Madison had returned to Atlanta determined to forget the momentary weakness, to refocus on her business, her independence, her carefully constructed life without Nathaniel Kingston. Until the pregnancy test turned positive 6 weeks later. Eliza stirred against Madison's shoulder, drawing her back to the present. The baby's tiny hand curled against her neck, an unconscious gesture of complete trust that brought tears to Madison's eyes. "What am I going to do about your father?" she whispered. The decision not to tell Nathaniel about the pregnancy hadn't been made in a single moment. It had evolved over days of soul-searching, of weighing the man he had been against the glimpse of who he might be becoming, of considering what it would mean to be bound to him for the next 18 years through a child. She remembered his words from their marriage, spoken during a rare vulnerable moment when his sister had announced her third pregnancy. "I'm not father material, Madison. My work requires total commitment. A child deserves better than that." At the time, she'd been devastated. Another dream diminished by his certainty. Now, ironically, those same words had guided her decision to keep Eliza's existence from him. A child did deserve better, better than being an obligation to a man who had never wanted children, better than being a pawn in whatever power dynamic might evolve between her parents. Yet now, watching his face as he first saw his daughter, Madison wondered if she'd misjudged him. The shock in his eyes had been expected, but not the wonder that followed it. Not the softness in his voice when he'd noted Eliza's resemblance to his mother. "We'll figure this out," she promised the now sleeping infant, carefully placing her back in the crib. Somehow, Madison spent a restless night preparing for Nathaniel's return. She'd called her sister Olivia, who had agreed to take Eliza to her house for a few hours, giving Madison the space to have what promised to be a difficult conversation without interruption. By noon, she was perched on the edge of her sofa, tea growing cold beside her, jumping at every sound from the street. Nathaniel Kingston had never been late for anything in his life, a point of pride for a man who considered punctuality a form of power. At precisely 12 o'clock, her doorbell rang. Madison smoothed her hands over her simple wrap dress, chosen carefully to project confidence and composure, and opened the door. Nathaniel stood on her porch looking uncharacteristically informal in dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater, his usual power suit absent. The casual attire made him seem more approachable, more like the man she'd first fallen in love with years ago. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said, the formal words at odds with the intensity in his eyes. Madison stepped back to let him enter. "We have things to discuss." He followed her to the living room, declining her offer of tea or coffee with a shake of his head. Instead of taking a seat, he moved to the mantelpiece where several framed photographs stood. His attention fixed on a new addition, Madison in a hospital bed, holding a swaddled Eliza. "My mother took that," Madison offered, watching him carefully. "The day after she was born." Nathaniel nodded without turning. "She looks exactly like Sophia did as a newborn." "Sophia? My sister." Now he did turn, his expression unreadable. "The one who died before I met you." Madison felt a pang of surprise. In 5 years of marriage, Nathaniel had rarely spoken of his younger sister, whose childhood illness had shaped his family in ways he'd never fully explained. That he would mention her now in connection with Eliza felt significant in ways Madison couldn't quite articulate. "I didn't know," she said softly. "There's a lot we didn't know about each other, despite being married." Nathaniel finally sat down across from her, tension visible in the set of his shoulders. "I've spent the night thinking about what to say to you today, preparing arguments, considering legal options." Madison stiffened. "If you're planning to threaten me with custody battles." "I'm not," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "Though I would be within my rights." "Your rights?" Madison felt heat rising in her cheeks. "You forfeited any claim to parental rights when you made it abundantly clear during our entire marriage that you never wanted children." "People change, Madison." His voice remained calm despite the challenge in her words. "I've changed. In 3 years? The man who told me that children were incompatible with his vision for the future has suddenly developed paternal instincts. Forgive me if I'm skeptical." Nathaniel leaned forward, eyes intent on hers. "Do you know why I came to your house yesterday?" The abrupt change of subject caught Madison off guard. "You said something about my business having a mysterious benefactor." "That was the excuse," he admitted. "The truth is, I've been keeping track of your career since the divorce, watching you build something impressive from the ground up. When you won the bid for the Westmoreland project, beating my company in the process, I was angry," Madison suggested when he hesitated. "Intrigued," he corrected. "And yes, perhaps a little threatened. The Madison I was married to wouldn't have had the confidence to go head-to-head with Kingston Developments. She would have backed down, deferred, second-guessed herself. The assessment, while painfully accurate, stung nonetheless. I'm not that person anymore." Clearly, a hint of admiration colored his voice. "You've become exactly who you always had the potential to be. Who you might have been sooner if I hadn't." He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. They both knew how his domineering personality had overshadowed hers during their marriage, how his dismissive attitude toward her ambitions had gradually eroded her confidence. "If you're here to apologize for our failed marriage, it's unnecessary," Madison said, keeping her voice neutral despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. "We've both moved on." "Have we?" Nathaniel's gaze was penetrating. "Because it seems the universe had other plans. Eliza is proof of that. One night of weakness doesn't erase 3 years of separate lives." "Nathaniel." Madison stood, needing to put physical distance between them. "Eliza was unexpected. Yes, but that doesn't change the fundamental issues that drove us apart." "What if those issues have changed?" He rose as well, following her movement. "What if I've changed?" Madison gave a disbelieving laugh. 3 years of silence, and now suddenly you want to be father of the year? "What exactly are you proposing here, Nathaniel?" "I want to be part of her life," he said simply. "Our daughter's life. Our daughter." The words hit Madison with unexpected force. Until this moment, Eliza had been hers alone. Her decision, her responsibility, her joy. The thought of sharing her, of Nathaniel claiming space in their carefully constructed world, sent panic spiraling through her chest. "It's not that simple," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You can't just decide you want to be a father now that the baby actually exists. Parenthood doesn't work that way." "Then teach me how it works," Nathaniel challenged, taking a step closer. "Give me the chance to learn, to be the father Eliza deserves." The sincerity in his voice caught Madison off guard. This wasn't the calculated, controlling man she'd divorced, or at least not entirely. There was something different in his eyes, something that hinted at depths she'd never been allowed to see during their marriage. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why now, Nathaniel? What's changed?" He was silent for a long moment, his expression shifting through emotions she couldn't quite read. When he finally spoke, his voice held a vulnerability she'd never heard before. "6 months ago, I was diagnosed with a heart condition," he said, the admission clearly costing him. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to require surgery, medication, lifestyle changes. Madison stared at him, stunned. "I had no idea. No one does. I've kept it private." He moved to the window, looking out at her small garden. "For the first time in my life, I was forced to confront my own mortality, to consider what legacy I'm actually leaving behind, what meaning my life has beyond accumulating wealth and power." He turned back to face her. "The empire I've built won't remember me, Madison. It won't carry my DNA, my history, my hopes into the next generation. But Eliza will." The raw honesty in his voice silenced any reflexive skepticism Madison might have felt. She'd never seen Nathaniel this exposed, this genuine. Even in their most intimate moments during marriage, he had maintained a certain guardedness, as if vulnerability was a weakness he couldn't afford to show. "I'm sorry about your health," she said finally. "But becoming a father isn't something you do to secure your legacy. It's about putting someone else's needs above your own. Always. It's about sleepless nights and endless worry and loving so deeply it physically hurts sometimes. Are you really prepared for that?" "I don't know," he admitted, surprising her again with his candor. "But I want the chance to learn. My queens, if you've ever had to rebuild your trust in someone who once broke it, tap that like button and let's support each other through these challenging journeys." Madison studied him, weighing his words against years of experience with the man he had been. Nathaniel Kingston didn't admit to not knowing things. It had been one of his cardinal rules in business and in life. That simple confession of uncertainty felt more genuine than any elaborate promise could have. "I'll need time," she said finally. "And so will you. This isn't something we can figure out in one conversation." "I understand." Nathaniel's relief was visible, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "What's our first step?" Madison considered the question carefully. "I think you should meet Eliza properly, not as a shock or a revelation, but as her father. She'll be back from my sister's in about an hour." "I'd like that," he said quietly. Then, with hesitation unusual for him, "Madison, there's something else you should know about me, about why children weren't part of my plan." She waited, sensing the importance of whatever he was struggling to share. "My sister Sophia, the one who died, she was only 7. Pain flickered across his face, decades old but still raw. She had a congenital heart defect similar to the one I was diagnosed with recently. This genetic runs in families. My parents spent every waking moment of her short life in hospitals, watching her suffer, fighting for treatments." Understanding dawned on Madison. "You were afraid of having a child who might inherit the condition." He nodded. "I watched what losing Sophia did to my parents, how it destroyed their marriage, their happiness. My father buried himself in work afterward. Sound familiar?" A bitter smile touched his lips. "I swore I'd never put a child through that suffering or myself through that loss. And now?" Madison asked, though she suspected the answer. "Now I know that my condition is manageable with modern medicine. That Eliza can be monitored from early on if she inherited any predisposition." He met her eyes directly. "And I've realized that protecting yourself from potential pain means missing the greatest joys as well." The revelation cast Nathaniel's past attitudes in a new light. Not just arrogance or ambition, but fear. Deep, foundational fear that had shaped his choices in ways Madison had never understood during their marriage. "Why didn't you tell me this when we were married?" she asked. "All those times we discussed having children. Because the real me, the scared little boy who watched his sister die, wasn't someone I allowed anyone to see. Not even you." Nathaniel's admission carried the weight of years of self-awareness gained too late. I was too busy building the invulnerable image I thought I needed to be successful. Before Madison could respond, the front door opened, and Olivia's voice called out, "We're back early. Someone missed her mama." The moment of connection between Madison and Nathaniel was interrupted as Olivia appeared in the living room doorway, Eliza bundled in her carrier. Olivia stopped short at the sight of Nathaniel, her expression immediately hardening. "What is he doing here?" she demanded, protective instinct flaring as she positioned herself between the baby and the man she considered responsible for her sister's past heartbreak. "It's okay, Liv," Madison said, moving to take Eliza's carrier. "Nathaniel knows about Eliza. He's here to meet her properly." Olivia's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "And you're allowing this?" Madison met her sister's concerned gaze with steady confidence. "Yes, he's her father. Biologically, maybe," Olivia muttered, but she relinquished the baby carrier to Madison. To Nathaniel, she added with unmistakable warning, "If you hurt them, either of them, you'll answer to me." Despite her petite frame and soft-spoken nature, Olivia Reed had the fierce protective instinct of a mother bear. The threat wasn't empty. "I understand," Nathaniel said, treating her wariness with respect rather than dismissal. Another departure from the man Madison had known. After a few more protective instructions about Eliza's schedule, Olivia left, casting one last suspicious glance at Nathaniel on her way out. "Your sister hasn't changed," he observed once the door closed behind her. "She remembers how I was after our divorce," Madison said simply, placing Eliza's carrier on the coffee table. She helped pick up the pieces. Madison gently unbuckled the sleeping infant, lifting her into her arms. Eliza stirred, blinking sleepily, her tiny face scrunching briefly before relaxing again. "Would you like to hold her?" Madison asked, surprising herself with the offer. Nathaniel's confident expression gave way to something like nervousness. "I've never held a newborn before. Just support her head and neck," Madison instructed, moving closer. "Here." With careful movements, she transferred Eliza into Nathaniel's arms, adjusting his hold until the baby was secure. The contrast was striking. This powerful man who controlled billions in assets, who commanded boardrooms and shaped Atlanta's skyline, now cradling a 7-pound infant with an expression of absolute wonder and terror. Eliza squirmed slightly, her eyes opening to gaze up at this unfamiliar face. Instead of crying, she simply stared, as if trying to make sense of the new person in her world. "Hello, Eliza," Nathaniel said softly, his voice catching. "I'm your father." The simple introduction, spoken with such genuine emotion, brought unexpected tears to Madison's eyes. Whatever happened between her and Nathaniel, whatever complicated path they would navigate as co-parents, this moment, this first real connection between father and daughter, felt sacred somehow. Eliza yawned widely, apparently unimpressed by the monumental nature of the introduction, which made both adults smile. "She has your eyes?" Nathaniel said, not looking away from the baby's face. "But my mother's expression, that same serious consideration." "She's very observant," Madison agreed. "The pediatrician says she's advanced in her tracking and focus for her age." "Of course she is," Nathaniel murmured, a note of pride already evident in his voice. "She's extraordinary." They settled into a strange, peaceful rhythm over the next hour, Nathaniel asking questions about Eliza's birth, her routines, her preferences, Madison answering with the detailed knowledge only a mother possesses. When Eliza began to fuss, Madison prepared a bottle, then hesitated before handing it to Nathaniel. "Would you like to feed her?" The uncertainty on his face was quickly replaced with determination. "Show me how." Madison guided him through the process, adjusting his hold on both baby and bottle, watching as he concentrated on the task with the same intensity he brought to business negotiations. When Eliza finished eating, Madison demonstrated the proper burping technique, which Nathaniel executed with exaggerated carefulness. "I won't break her," Madison assured him, amused by his tentativeness. "I've closed billion-dollar deals less nerve-wracking than this," he admitted, relief evident when Eliza produced the desired burp. As the afternoon progressed into evening, they continued this delicate dance of new parenthood, Madison leading, Nathaniel following with uncharacteristic humility. When Eliza finally fell asleep in her father's arms, he looked up at Madison with an expression she'd never seen before, something raw and transformative. "Thank you," he said simply, "for today." For her. Madison nodded, unable to find adequate words for the complex emotions swirling through her. This was not how she had imagined Eliza's first meeting with her father. Not the angry confrontation she'd feared, nor the cold legal battle she'd dreaded. "This doesn't solve everything," she said finally as Nathaniel carefully placed the sleeping baby in her crib. "We still have a lot to figure out." "I know." He stood looking down at his daughter, the soft nursery light illuminating his profile. "But it's a beginning." As they moved back downstairs, the practical questions that had been temporarily set aside by the magic of meeting Eliza resurfaced. "What exactly are you proposing in terms of involvement?" Madison asked, settling on the neutral term rather than the more loaded custody or visitation. "I'd like regular time with her," Nathaniel replied, taking a seat across from Madison in the living room. "Beyond that, I'm open to what works best for both of you. I recognize you're her primary caregiver, especially while she's this young." The reasonableness of his response was another surprise. The Nathaniel she'd been married to would have demanded equal control, would have seen compromise as weakness. "And financially?" She raised the question carefully, wary of his reaction. "I'll provide whatever support you'll accept," he said. "But Madison, this isn't about money for me. I want to be her father, not just her financial backing." Madison nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, but we should formalize the support aspect at least. For Eliza's security. Of course, I'll have my lawyers draft something for your review." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else I'd like to propose." Madison tensed slightly, waiting. "The Westmoreland renovation project. Your design vision combined with my company's resources and connections could make it extraordinary." He leaned forward, excitement evident in his voice. "A true collaboration, Madison. Equal partners." The unexpected business proposition caught her off guard. "You want to work together professionally? Now? Why not? You've proven your firm's capabilities by winning the bid over mine. And frankly, your design concept for the historic elements was superior to what my team developed." The admission of her professional advantage seemed to come easily to him now. "Think of what we could create if we combined our strengths instead of competing." Madison studied him, trying to discern any hidden agenda in the proposition. "The last time we worked together on anything, it didn't end well, Nathaniel." "We're different people now," he countered. "You're not the woman whose talents I dismissed, and I'm trying very hard not to be the man who did the dismissing." The proposal was tempting from a purely business perspective. Kingston Developments had resources and connections that would take Madison years to build independently. The Westmoreland project could become a showcase that would elevate Madison Reed design to national prominence. But mixing their professional and personal lives again, especially with Eliza now in the equation, "I need to think about it," she said finally. "The business proposition and everything else." Nathaniel nodded, accepting her caution without the impatience he would have shown in the past. "Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere, Madison. Not this time." As he rose to leave, Madison walked him to the door, both of them aware of the seismic shift that had occurred in their relationship over the course of a single day. They were no longer simply ex-spouses with painful history between them. They were parents, bound by a connection that would last a lifetime. At the door, Nathaniel turned to her, his expression serious. "I know I don't deserve your trust yet, but I'm going to earn it, Madison. For Eliza's sake and maybe for ours too." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Madison standing in her doorway, watching his tall figure disappear into the gathering dusk, wondering if the man who had just left was truly different from the one who had broken her heart, or if she was setting herself up for another devastating fall. The The weeks that followed established a tentative new pattern in Madison's life. Nathaniel began with short, supervised visits to see Eliza. An hour in the evening after work, weekend mornings when the baby was most alert and engaged. Each time, he arrived precisely when promised, never canceling despite his demanding schedule, treating these appointments with his daughter as non-negotiable priorities. Madison watched his interaction with Eliza evolve from nervous awkwardness to growing confidence. He researched infant development obsessively, sharing articles and studies with Madison about everything from sleep patterns to cognitive stimulation. When Eliza smiled for the first time, a real, responsive smile rather than a reflex, Nathaniel happened to be holding her. The look of absolute wonder on his face had pierced something in Madison's carefully guarded heart. 2 weeks after his discovery of Eliza, Nathaniel presented Madison with legal documents establishing a generous trust for their daughter's future, along with child support arrangements that exceeded anything she would have requested. The papers came with no strings attached, no demands for specific custody or control, just the simple statement that regardless of how their co-parenting relationship evolved, Eliza's financial security was assured. Madison had signed the documents with mixed emotions. The security for Eliza was a relief, but she couldn't help remembering how money had always been Nathaniel's preferred solution to problems, emotional and otherwise, during their marriage. "Money isn't the only thing she'll need from you," Madison had said as she returned the signed papers. "I know," Nathaniel had replied, surprising her again with his self-awareness. "It's just the easiest thing for me to give right now. The rest, I'm working on it." And he was, in ways Madison couldn't deny. He'd begun seeing a therapist, something he'd dismissed as weakness for people who can't solve their own problems during their marriage. He mentioned it casually one evening as he prepared to leave after putting Eliza down for the night. "Dr. Brennan thinks my drive for control stems from the helplessness I felt watching Sophia's illness," he'd said, shrugging into his coat. "Apparently I've been trying to control everything in my life to compensate for the one thing I couldn't change." Madison had been momentarily speechless at this casual revelation of insight. The Nathaniel she'd been married to would never have admitted to psychological vulnerability, let alone shared a therapist's assessment of his behavior. "That makes sense," she'd managed finally. He'd smiled ruefully. "Doesn't excuse what I did to you, though. How I treated you during our marriage." "No," Madison had agreed quietly. "It doesn't. But understanding is a start." As for the Westmoreland project collaboration he'd proposed, Madison had eventually agreed, with carefully negotiated terms that protected her firm's creative autonomy and ensured equal credit for the design elements. Their first professional meeting had been awkward, both hyper-aware of maintaining appropriate boundaries in front of their respective teams. But as the project developed, Madison found herself grudgingly impressed by how Nathaniel had changed his professional approach. He listened more than he spoke in creative sessions, asked questions rather than issuing directives, and publicly credited Madison's insights in ways that elevated her standing with contractors and clients alike. "You're different in meetings," she observed one evening after a particularly successful presentation to the Historical Preservation Board. "Less domineering, arrogant, controlling," he supplied with surprising self-deprecation. "I was going to say intense," she finished, smiling despite herself. "But those work too." Nathaniel laughed, a sound that had once been rare but was becoming more frequent. "Heart surgery has a way of adjusting your perspective on what battles are worth fighting." The casual reference to his health condition, something he'd hidden from business associates and rivals for months, reminded Madison how significantly their relationship had shifted. There was a growing honesty between them, a tentative trust being rebuilt on new foundations. As Christmas approached, bringing with it Eliza's 2-month milestone, the question of holiday arrangements became unavoidable. Madison had always spent Christmas Eve and morning with her sister Olivia's family, a tradition she wasn't willing to sacrifice, especially for Eliza's first Christmas. "I'd like Eliza to experience Christmas morning at Olivia's," she told Nathaniel during one of his evening visits. "Her cousins are so excited to have a baby in the family this year." She braced herself for an argument, for Nathaniel to insist on equal holiday time or to propose some extravagant alternative. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. Family traditions are important, he agreed. What if I come for Christmas dinner? I could bring dessert. The simple suggestion, so reasonable, so unlike the man who had once insisted on controlling every holiday detail, caught Madison off guard. You want to have Christmas dinner with my family? She clarified. With Olivia, who still looks at you like she's plotting your demise. Nathaniel winced. Your sister's protective instincts are well-founded. But yes, if they'll have me. Eliza should have her father present for her first Christmas. And well, I don't have other plans. The admission of loneliness, however indirect, stirred something unexpected in Madison's chest. She'd been so focused on protecting herself and Eliza from Nathaniel's potential negative influence that she hadn't considered what these holidays might mean to a man whose only family was now a newborn daughter and an ex-wife who kept him at careful arm's length. I'll talk to Olivia, she promised. But fair warning, her husband Marcus makes the world's most competitive gingerbread houses, and he expects everyone to participate. Nathaniel's smile had been genuine. I accept the challenge. When Christmas Day arrived, bringing with it a rare Atlanta snowfall that transformed the city into a winter wonderland, Madison found herself watching Nathaniel with a perspective she hadn't anticipated. He arrived at Olivia's suburban home bearing not just the promised dessert, an elegant bûche de Noël from the city's finest bakery, but also thoughtfully chosen gifts for Madison's nieces and nephew, and a peace offering of expensive scotch for Marcus. Olivia had greeted him with cool politeness, accepting the lavish dessert with a raised eyebrow but no outright hostility. Her husband Marcus, less burdened by history, had been more welcoming, especially after examining the label on the scotch bottle. Single malt, aged 18 years, he'd observed, impressed despite himself. You did your homework, Kingston. Madison mentioned you were a connoisseur. Nathaniel had replied, the casual reference to conversations with Madison revealing how their communications had extended beyond mere co-parenting logistics. Throughout the day, Madison found herself watching Nathaniel navigate her family dynamics with unexpected grace. He answered Olivia's pointed questions about his intentions with patient honesty rather than defensive deflection. He got down on the floor to help Madison's 7-year-old nephew construct a complicated Lego set. He held Eliza with increasing confidence, narrating the holiday festivities to her as if the 2-month-old understood every word. Most surprising was how he handled the infamous gingerbread house competition. Rather than approaching it with the competitive intensity that characterized his business dealings, Nathaniel deferred to Madison's 10-year-old niece Charlotte, who had appointed herself his design partner. We need more pink frosting, Charlotte had declared, directing Nathaniel with the absolute authority only children possess. And those silver ball things for the roof. Yes, ma'am. Nathaniel had responded with mock seriousness, executing her vision without imposing his own perfectionist standards. When their lopsided creation with its excessive pink frosting and precarious candy cane columns was declared the winner by Charlotte's unilateral decision, Nathaniel had celebrated as if they'd secured a billion-dollar contract, lifting the delighted girl onto his shoulders for a victory lap around the dining room. Watching him, Madison felt something shift in her perception. This wasn't the calculated charm he'd sometimes displayed during their marriage when it served his purposes. This was genuine connection, joy in the moment, pleasure in simple family traditions. Later, as evening settled over the snow-covered neighborhood and the children dozed in front of a holiday movie, Madison found herself alone with Nathaniel in Olivia's kitchen, helping him wash dishes while the rest of the adults played cards in the dining room. Thank you for including me today, he said quietly, accepting a plate from her to dry. It means more than you know. You've been good with everyone, Madison acknowledged. Even Olivia seems to be thawing slightly. High praise indeed. Nathaniel smiled, then grew serious. My Christmases growing up weren't like this. Not after Sophia died. My father worked through most holidays. My mother went through the motions, but the joy was gone. He placed a dried glass carefully in the cabinet. I want better for Eliza. I want her to have this. Family, traditions, people who show up. The simple honesty of his statement touched Madison deeply. It revealed a yearning for connection, for meaning beyond material success, that she'd never fully recognized in him during their marriage. People who show up, she repeated softly. That's what you've been doing these past months, isn't it? Showing up consistently for Eliza. For me, in a way. Nathaniel met her eyes, something vulnerable in his gaze. I'm trying to be the man I should have been years ago, the man you deserved then, the father Eliza deserves now. The moments stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Madison became acutely aware of their proximity in the small kitchen, of how familiar yet different he seemed after these months of cautious reconnection. The spell was broken by Eliza's cry from the living room, where she'd been sleeping in her portable bassinet. Madison moved to respond, but Nathaniel touched her arm gently. "Let me," he said. "You've been handling everything all day. Finish your coffee while it's still warm." He left before she could protest, returning moments later with a fussing Eliza expertly cradled against his shoulder, patting her back with the practiced rhythm he'd developed over weeks of learning her preferences. "I think she's just overtired," he murmured, swaying slightly in the soothing motion that often calmed their daughter. Too much excitement for one day. Madison watched as Eliza's cries subsided, her tiny head nestling into the crook of Nathaniel's neck as she drifted back to sleep. The trust between father and daughter was palpable, built through consistent presence and genuine care over these past months. "We should probably head home soon," Madison said, glancing out at the snow that had begun falling again. "The roads will get worse after dark." Nathaniel nodded, still swaying gently with Eliza. "I had my driver bring the SUV with winter tires. Let me take you both home. Safer than you driving in this." 6 months ago, Madison would have interpreted the offer as Nathaniel's need to control the situation, to demonstrate his superior resources. Now, watching him cradle their sleeping daughter with such natural tenderness, she recognized it for what it was, genuine concern for their safety. "All right," she agreed, surprising both of them. "That would be helpful. Thank you." The drive back to Madison's home through snow-drifted streets was peaceful. Eliza securely fastened in her car seat between them in the spacious back seat of Nathaniel's luxury SUV. Christmas lights glowed from decorated homes, transforming Atlanta's historic neighborhoods into fairylands of color against the white landscape. "I've been thinking," Nathaniel said as they turned onto Madison Street, his voice carefully neutral, "about more permanent arrangements for my time with Eliza." Madison tensed slightly. Here it came, the custody discussion she'd been anticipating and dreading. "I'd like to convert the guest wing of my house into a proper nursery," he continued, "for when she's old enough to stay with me occasionally. Nothing overnight until you're comfortable with it, of course. But eventually." "You want shared custody?" Madison stated, the words feeling heavy in her mouth. "I want what's best for Eliza," Nathaniel corrected gently. "Which I believe includes having both parents fully involved in her life, yes." "But Madison," he turned to face her as the car stopped in her driveway, "this isn't about legal rights or controlling access. It's about giving our daughter the most stable, loving environment we can create for her." Madison looked down at Eliza, sleeping peacefully between them, unaware of the complex adult negotiations surrounding her future. "And what does that look like to you? Practically speaking?" "I don't have a fixed blueprint," Nathaniel admitted, another departure from his usual approach of presenting fully formed plans. "I think we create it together, based on what works for all three of us. Starting small, building as Eliza grows and as," he hesitated, "as our trust grows." Our trust. The simple phrase acknowledged the fragility of what they were rebuilding, the care required to move forward. "I'll think about it," Madison promised as the driver opened her door, letting in a swirl of snowflakes. "We can discuss details after the holidays." Nathaniel helped gather Eliza's diaper bag and carrier, following Madison to her front door through the accumulating snow. Once inside, he carefully transferred the still sleeping baby to her crib, while Madison turned on lights and adjusted the thermostat. "Thank you again for today," he said as he prepared to leave. "For letting me be part of Eliza's first Christmas." Madison nodded, suddenly aware of how much had changed since that stormy confrontation in Eliza's nursery just weeks ago. How the man standing before her both was and wasn't the husband she'd divorced 3 years earlier. "Nathaniel," she said impulsively as he reached for the door handle. "Would you like to come for New Year's Eve? Nothing fancy. Just dinner here with Eliza before she goes down for the night. A quiet start to the new year." The invitation surprised them both. Nathaniel's expression softened, genuine pleasure replacing his usual controlled facade. "I'd like that very much," he said simply. As he departed into the snowy evening, Madison found herself standing at the window watching his retreating figure, her emotions a complex tangle of caution and possibility. The future she'd so carefully planned, just her and Eliza against the world, was shifting to include the man she'd once loved, once lost, and now was seeing anew through the lens of shared parenthood. Was she opening herself to potential heartbreak again? Or was this evolving relationship with Nathaniel more honest, more equal than before? Something worth exploring, not just for Eliza's sake, but for her own? The answer remained uncertain as the snow continued to fall, blanketing her garden in white possibility. The new year arrived with unexpected challenges. 2 days after their quiet New Year's Eve celebration, a simple dinner where they talked easily about their hopes for Eliza's future, Nathaniel called Madison from the hospital. "My heart," he explained, his voice strained through the phone. "An episode. The doctors want to move up my surgery to next week." The fear that gripped Madison surprised her with its intensity. "How serious is it? Do you need anything?" "Not immediately life-threatening," he assured her, though the tension in his voice suggested the situation was more concerning than he was admitting. "But they want to address it sooner rather than later." "I'll be fine, Madison. I just wanted you to know in case you need to reach me and I'm not available." The careful phrasing, his concern for her potential needs rather than his own, spoke volumes about how he'd been working to change his self-centered patterns. "Which hospital?" Madison asked, already reaching for her coat. "Madison, you don't need to." "Which hospital, Nathaniel?" she repeated firmly. An hour later, she arrived at Emory University Hospital with Eliza secured in her carrier. She found Nathaniel in a private room, looking uncharacteristically vulnerable in a hospital gown, monitors tracking his heart rhythm with steady beeps. Surprise and something deeper flickered across his face when she appeared in the doorway. "You didn't have to come." "I know," Madison said simply, setting Eliza's carrier on the visitor's chair. "But you're her father and she should be here. And you shouldn't be alone right now." The words acknowledged a truth Madison had been gradually accepting over the past months. Whatever their complicated personal history, Nathaniel was now an essential part of Eliza's life, and by extension, hers. The fear in his eyes as he looked at their daughter broke something in Madison's carefully maintained emotional barriers. This man, who had once seemed invincible, impervious to ordinary human vulnerabilities, was facing his mortality with the new perspective of a father who might not see his child grow up. "The procedure has a high success rate," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "Over 95%. I'll be fine." Madison nodded, lifting Eliza from her carrier and bringing her closer to the bed. "Of course you will. You're too stubborn to be anything else." A smile tugged at his lips, breaking the tension. "Says the woman who rebuilt her entire life out of spite after our divorce." "Not spite," Madison corrected, settling into the chair beside his bed with Eliza in her arms. "Determination. There's a difference." "A fine line," Nathaniel observed, reaching out to touch Eliza's tiny hand. "One I hope she inherits from you." The surgery was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, Madison found herself increasingly involved in Nathaniel's preparations, reviewing medical information with him, helping organize his post-operative care, even attending the final consultation with his cardiologist. "You don't have to do all this," Nathaniel said the evening before the procedure, as Madison made notes about his medication schedule. "I know," she replied, not looking up from her careful documentation. "But someone needs to make sure you actually follow the doctor's orders after surgery. And I suspect you'll be a terrible patient left to your own devices." My housekeeper could. Your housekeeper is 67 years old and isn't going to force you to rest when you inevitably try to dial into board meetings 2 days after open-heart surgery. Madison interrupted firmly. Besides, this affects Eliza too. Her father needs to be healthy. The acknowledgement of his importance in their daughter's life hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to articulate. The morning of the surgery, Madison arrived at the hospital with Eliza, having arranged for Olivia to come take the baby once Nathaniel went into the operating room. To her surprise, Olivia had offered without being asked. "He's her father," Olivia had said simply when Madison expressed gratitude for the help. "And whatever happened between you two, he's trying now. That matters." In the preoperative room, Nathaniel appeared calm, but Madison recognized the tightness around his eyes that betrayed his anxiety. He brightened when she entered with Eliza, reaching for their daughter with a tenderness that still surprised Madison sometimes. "There's my girl," he murmured, cradling Eliza against his hospital gown. "Come to wish Daddy luck?" Madison watched as he spoke softly to the baby, memorizing her features as if afraid he might not see them again. Despite all the reassurances about the procedure's safety, the reality of what was happening, open-heart surgery with its inherent risks, hung heavily in the room. When the nurses came to take him to the operating theater, Nathaniel handed Eliza back to Madison, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Madison," he said quietly, holding her gaze, "if anything happens—" "It won't," she interrupted firmly. "But if it does," he persisted, "I need you to know something." He took a deep breath. "These past few months with you and Eliza have been the most meaningful of my life. Whatever happens today, thank you for giving me that gift." Before Madison could respond, the nurses were wheeling him away, leaving her standing in the empty pre-op room with Eliza warm against her chest and Nathaniel's words echoing in her mind. The hours of surgery stretched interminably. After Olivia took Eliza home, Madison paced the waiting room, alternating between furious productivity on her phone, answering work emails, checking project timelines, and complete stillness, staring unseeing at the generic hospital artwork. Why was she here? The question circled her mind as the hours passed. Nathaniel had other people in his life, business associates, friends, his executive assistant who efficiently managed every aspect of his professional existence. Yet she knew with absolute certainty that none of them were sitting in this waiting room, that when he had faced this vulnerability, this mortality, he had turned to her, and she had come, without hesitation, without calculation. What did that mean for her carefully reconstructed life, her hard-won independence from the man who had once diminished her so thoroughly? Finally, the surgeon appeared, still in scrubs, looking tired but satisfied. "The procedure went well," he announced. "Better than expected, actually. He's in recovery now." Relief flooded through Madison with unexpected force, leaving her lightheaded. "When can I see him?" "About an hour. A nurse will come get you when he's settled in ICU." The doctor hesitated, then added, "You're listed as his medical proxy. I wasn't aware you two had reconciled." The statement caught Madison off guard. "We're not. We're co-parenting, but we're not back together." The doctor nodded, clearly not convinced. "Well, whatever your relationship status, he made sure you had full decision-making authority if complications arose. That speaks to significant trust." As the doctor left, Madison sank into a chair, processing this revelation. Nathaniel, who controlled every aspect of his business empire with meticulous precision, had placed his literal life in her hands. The man who had once criticized her decision-making about household finances had entrusted her with medical decisions that could mean life or death. "People change, Madison." His words from months ago echoed in her mind. "Have changed." Perhaps, finally, she was beginning to believe him. When she was finally allowed to see Nathaniel in the ICU, Madison was struck by how vulnerable he appeared. This powerful man now connected to monitors and IVs, his usual commanding presence diminished by the clinical environment. His eyes opened when she approached the bed, relief evident in his gaze. "You're still here?" he murmured, voice raspy from the breathing tube that had been removed after surgery. Madison took the chair beside his bed, her hand finding his almost instinctively. Of course I am. Someone has to make sure you follow doctor's orders. A weak smile touched his lips. Always the practical one. The doctor says everything went better than expected, she informed him, keeping her tone light despite the lingering fear she'd felt during those long hours of waiting. You should make a full recovery if you actually rest and rehabilitate properly. Is that a challenge? A hint of the old Nathaniel surfaced in his tired eyes. It's a fact, Madison replied firmly. You have a daughter who needs you healthy and whole for a very long time. The mention of Eliza sobered him. Where is she? With Olivia. I'll bring her to visit tomorrow, once you're moved to a regular room. Madison squeezed his hand gently. Right now, you need to rest. Nathaniel's fingers tightened around hers. Madison, what I said before surgery. We don't need to talk about that now, she interrupted, suddenly uncertain about confronting the emotion that had charged their last interaction before he was wheeled into surgery. Yes, we do. Despite his weakened state, determination hardened his voice. I meant it. These months with you and Eliza, seeing you as a mother, watching you rebuild your life and your business, it's changed how I see everything, including myself. Madison felt tears threatening and blinked them back. You nearly died today, Nathaniel. This isn't the time for life-altering conversations. Nearly dying tends to clarify one's priorities, he countered, a shadow of his usual stubbornness returning. And mine are very clear now. Before he could continue, a nurse entered to check his vitals, effectively ending the conversation. By the time she left, exhaustion had overtaken him, his eyelids drooping despite his obvious desire to continue their discussion. Sleep, Madison instructed gently. We'll talk tomorrow. As Nathaniel drifted off, Madison remained by his bedside, her thoughts in turmoil. The fear she'd experienced while he was in surgery had revealed feelings she wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. Feelings that complicated the careful boundaries she'd established since their divorce. The days that followed established a new pattern. Madison divided her time between her design firm, caring for Eliza, and visiting Nathaniel in the hospital. She brought Eliza daily, watching as the baby's presence provided motivation for her father's recovery. Nathaniel pushed himself in physical therapy, determined to regain strength quickly, but also displayed a new patience with the healing process that surprised his doctors. Most Type A executives fight us on every restriction, his cardiologist commented to Madison during a progress consultation. He's actually following the program exactly as prescribed. He has something to live for now, Madison replied simply, watching through the doorway as Nathaniel held Eliza, showing her the get-well cards that had accumulated on his bedside table. When he was released from the hospital after a week, the question of his post-operative care arose. His sprawling Buckhead mansion, while luxurious, presented practical challenges for someone recovering from major surgery. Multiple staircases, considerable distances between rooms, and only a part-time housekeeper who was, as Madison had pointed out, not equipped to monitor a reluctant patient. I've made arrangements with a home healthcare service, Nathaniel told Madison the day before his discharge, clearly expecting resistance. A nurse will stay at the house for the first 2 weeks. Madison considered the solution, then shook her head. That's not necessary. I can't impose on you further, he protested. You've already done more than. You can stay at my house, Madison interrupted, the decision crystallizing even as she spoke the words. The guest room is on the main floor, no stairs to navigate. I'm already caring for Eliza, so coordinating your recovery care makes practical sense. Nathaniel stared at her, clearly stunned by the offer. Madison, are you sure? That's a significant commitment. She nodded, surprising herself with her certainty. It's what's best for Eliza. And for you. The alternative is hiring a stranger to care for you in that enormous, empty house, which seems unnecessarily complicated. What she didn't articulate was the relief she felt at the prospect of having him where she could monitor his recovery directly, where she wouldn't have to wonder if he was pushing himself too hard or ignoring medical advice when no one was watching. The arrangement was meant to last 2 weeks, just long enough for Nathaniel to regain basic independence before returning to his own home. But as January turned to February, the temporary situation evolved into something neither had anticipated. Nathaniel proved to be a surprisingly considerate houseguest, respectful of Madison's space and routines. He took on whatever tasks his recovery allowed, rocking Eliza when she fussed at night so Madison could sleep, managing the household calendar to coordinate his medical appointments with her work deadlines, even directing his housekeeping staff to maintain Madison's home while she focused on the Westmoreland project. Their professional collaboration continued despite his recovery, with Nathaniel participating in virtual meetings from Madison's dining room table while she presented their joint design concepts to clients and contractors. The arrangement created an unexpected synergy, with ideas flowing freely between them during evening discussions after Eliza was asleep. "We make a good team," Nathaniel observed one night as they reviewed architectural renderings spread across Madison's coffee table. "Better than we ever did during our marriage." Madison glanced up from the blueprints, struck by the observation's accuracy. "We were different people then." "I was different," Nathaniel corrected gently. "You were always extraordinary. I just couldn't see it through my own ego." The compliment, delivered with such straightforward sincerity, caught Madison off guard. During their marriage, Nathaniel's praise had always been conditional, tinged with suggestions for improvement. This unqualified appreciation of her abilities felt unfamiliar but undeniably warming. As February progressed, bringing with it Eliza's first Valentine's Day, Madison found the boundaries she'd so carefully maintained beginning to blur. The practical co-parenting arrangement had evolved into something more intimate, not physically but emotionally. They shared the quiet domesticity of early parenthood, bleary-eyed midnight feedings, triumphant celebrations of Eliza's small developmental milestones, inside jokes about the ridiculous children's shows that somehow ended up on Madison's television. One evening, Madison returned from a client meeting to find Nathaniel asleep on the sofa, Eliza napping peacefully on his chest, his protective hand splayed across her tiny back. The sight hit Madison with unexpected force. This powerful man, still recovering from surgery that had literally opened his heart, now emotionally opened in ways she'd never witnessed during their marriage. She stood watching them for a long moment, confronting the truth she'd been avoiding. Somewhere amid the shared responsibilities and genuine co-parenting, amid watching Nathaniel become the man he could have been years ago, she'd begun to fall in love with him again. Not the man she'd divorced, but the man he was becoming, thoughtful, vulnerable, genuinely present. The realization terrified her. She had rebuilt her life so carefully after their divorce, had found strength in independence. Letting Nathaniel back into her heart risked everything she'd worked for, everything she'd become. Yet denying the connection growing between them felt increasingly impossible as the weeks passed. The way he looked at her when she entered a room, not with the appraising assessment of their marriage, but with genuine appreciation. The casual touches that lingered slightly longer than necessary when they passed coffee cups or design samples. The late-night conversations that drifted from Eliza's future to their own past, excavating old wounds with new honesty. By March, nearly 3 months after Eliza's dramatic introduction to her father, and 6 weeks after Nathaniel's surgery, the temporary living arrangement had developed an air of permanence neither acknowledged directly. Nathaniel had recovered enough to return to his own home, yet neither raised the subject. His clothes gradually migrated from a single guest room drawer to the closet. His preferred coffee appeared in Madison's pantry. His books mingled with hers on the living room shelves. The shift in their relationship remained unspoken, existing in meaningful glances and almost touches, in the domestic rhythm they'd established that felt increasingly like a family rather than a pragmatic co-parenting arrangement. The catalyst came unexpectedly, on the anniversary of the Savannah weekend that had brought Eliza into existence. Madison had been reviewing her calendar when she realized the significance of the date, memories of that storm-swept night flooding back. The vulnerability, the connection, the brief glimpse of what might have been if they'd been different people then. She found Nathaniel in the nursery that evening, reading to Eliza from a book of fairy tales, his deep voice softening on words like forever and promise. "She's too young to understand the stories," Madison said from the doorway. smiling at the scene. Nathaniel looked up, returning her smile. It's never too early for happy endings. Besides, I think she likes the sound of my voice. She does, Madison agreed, entering the room fully. She settles faster for you than for me sometimes. Novelty factor, Nathaniel suggested, carefully placing the sleeping baby in her crib. You're her constant. I'm still the exciting variable. Madison laughed softly. I never thought I'd hear Nathaniel Kingston describe himself as a variable in any equation. I never thought I'd be living in a house with floral throw pillows, but here we are, he countered, his tone light but his eyes serious as they met hers. Life has a way of surprising us. As they left the nursery together, Madison found herself acutely aware of his proximity, of the charged silence that had become increasingly familiar between them. Do you know what today is? She asked as they descended the stairs. Nathaniel paused, thinking. Tuesday. It's been exactly 1 year since Savannah, Madison clarified. Since the storm. Recognition dawned in his eyes. Since Eliza was conceived. Madison nodded, suddenly uncertain why she'd raised the subject. It's strange to think how much has changed in a year. Everything has changed, Nathaniel agreed, his voice deepening. For the better, I hope. They'd reached the living room, the space that had transformed over recent weeks from solely Madison's territory to a shared domain, evidence of Nathaniel's presence integrated with her own. His laptop beside her design books, his reading glasses on the coffee table, photos of Eliza with both her parents displayed on the mantel. I never expected this, Madison admitted, gesturing vaguely to encompass not just the physical evidence of their cohabitation, but the emotional reality it represented. Any of it. Neither did I. Nathaniel moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. But Madison, I've never been more grateful for the unexpected. The directness in his gaze made her breath catch. This was the moment when one of them typically would break eye contact, change the subject, retreat to safer emotional ground. This time, neither did. Nathaniel, Madison began, his name a question and answer both. What are we doing? I think, he said carefully, reaching to take her hand. We're finding our way back to each other, but differently this time. Better. The simple touch of his fingers against hers sent warmth spiraling through her. How long had it been since they'd touched like this, with intent rather than incidental contact? I'm afraid, she admitted, the confession costing her pride but necessary for honesty. Not of you exactly, but of losing myself again. Of forgetting who I've become. Nathaniel's fingers tightened around hers. The woman you've become is exactly who I'm falling in love with, Madison. Not the woman I tried to make you be during our marriage, but this incredible, strong, talented person who rebuilt herself despite my best efforts to convince her she couldn't. The words, so different from anything he would have said during their marriage, broke something open in Madison's chest. A dam of caution and fear that had protected her heart for years. I don't want to go backward, she said softly. I can't. Forward, then, Nathaniel suggested, his free hand coming up to touch her cheek with reverent gentleness. Together, building something new, not trying to recreate what was broken. The sincerity in his voice, in his eyes, melted the last of Madison's resistance. She leaned into his touch, her heart racing with a mixture of hope and lingering fear. I'm still going to run my company, she warned. I won't give that up again. A smile touched Nathaniel's lips. I would never ask you to. Your success is one of the many things I admire about you, and I won't tolerate being diminished or controlled, even subtly. I'm counting on you to call me out if old habits resurface, he promised. I'm still learning, Madison. Still growing. But I want to be the man you and Eliza deserve. The vulnerability in that admission, so contrary to the invincible image he'd maintained throughout their marriage, was what finally convinced Madison that his transformation was genuine. The Nathaniel Kingston she had divorced would never have acknowledged imperfection or ongoing growth. I think, she said carefully, that you already are becoming that man. The kiss that followed was different from any they had shared before. During their marriage, during that stormy night in Savannah, during all the years they had known each other. It held both memory and discovery, familiarity and newness, the acknowledgement of past wounds alongside the promise of future healing. When they separated, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her lips. "Move in with me," Madison whispered, surprising herself with the invitation. Not as a guest recovering from surgery, not as Eliza's father staying close to his daughter, but as what? Nathaniel prompted gently when she hesitated. Madison took a deep breath, stepping into vulnerability with courage born from the strength she'd built since their divorce. "As my partner, in every sense." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough, but his words confirmed it. Yes, absolutely yes. As spring bloomed across Atlanta, bringing vibrant color to Madison's garden and warming the historic district with golden sunshine, their renewed relationship deepened in ways neither had anticipated. They moved deliberately, both wary of repeating past mistakes, both determined to build something stronger on the foundation of who they had become individually. The Westmoreland project flourished under their collaborative leadership, Madison's design vision perfectly complemented by Nathaniel's business acumen. Rather than competing, they elevated each other's strengths in ways that surprised their respective teams and delighted their clients. At home, they established new patterns, equal parenting responsibilities, shared household management, regular design nights, when Madison's creativity flowed freely throughout the house without Nathaniel's former attempts to contain it within acceptable parameters. Most significantly, they really talked about everything from their fears to their ambitions, from Eliza's future to their own past mistakes. Nathaniel continued therapy, sometimes inviting Madison to join sessions where they explored the dynamics that had undermined their first attempt at marriage. "I never felt secure enough to be vulnerable with you before," Nathaniel admitted during one such session. "I believed showing any weakness would make me lose your respect, when in reality, it was my inability to be authentic that eventually lost your love." It was during Eliza's christening in May, a small, intimate ceremony with only family present, that Nathaniel surprised Madison with an unexpected question. They stood in the church garden afterward, watching as Olivia and her husband cooed over Eliza in her elaborate christening gown. The spring sunlight dappled through ancient oak trees, casting a golden glow over the peaceful scene. "I've been thinking," Nathaniel said quietly, his hand finding Madison's in a gesture that had become natural again. "About us. About family." Madison looked up at him, noting the seriousness in his expression. "What about us? When we married the first time, it was all about appearance. The society wedding, the perfect couple, the merger of our public personas." He turned to face her fully. "If we were to marry again, and I emphasize if, what would you want it to look like?" The question caught Madison completely off guard. They had been rebuilding their relationship for months now, had created a functioning family unit with Eliza at its center, but marriage had remained an unspoken possibility, too weighted with past failure to approach directly. "Are you proposing?" she asked cautiously. "Or is this a theoretical discussion?" Nathaniel smiled, reaching into his pocket. "It was meant to be theoretical to test the waters. But now that we're here." He withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring unlike anything he would have chosen during their first relationship. Not the ostentatious diamond that had once graced her finger, but a unique vintage piece with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds in an intricate setting. "Madison Reed," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm not asking you to resume our old marriage. That relationship died for good reasons. I'm asking if you would consider building a new marriage with me, one based on who we've become, not who we were. One that honors your independence and my growth, that puts Eliza's happiness and our mutual respect at its center." Madison stared at the ring, her heart racing. This wasn't the calculated business proposal their first engagement had been. This was something entirely different. Honest, vulnerable, grounded in reality rather than fantasy. "If it's too soon," Nathaniel began when she didn't immediately respond. "It's not that," Madison interrupted, finding her voice. "I'm just surprised. I didn't think you'd want to risk marriage again after everything we've been through." The only real risk would be letting fear keep us from building the family Eliza deserves, he replied. The family we both deserve, if we're brave enough to try again. Madison looked across the garden to where Eliza was being gently bounced in her Aunt Olivia's arms, sunlight catching on her dark curls. Nathaniel's hair, Madison's smile already evident in her tiny features. Their daughter, created in a moment of reconnection, now the center around which their lives revolved. Yes, she said simply, returning her gaze to Nathaniel's hopeful face. But on one condition. Name it, he responded without hesitation. We write our own vows this time. Real ones, not the society-approved script we used before. Nathaniel's smile deepened as he slipped the ring onto her finger. I've already started drafting mine. They begin with I promise to remember that your strength is not a challenge to mine, but the foundation upon which we both stand. Tears pricked Madison's eyes at the perfect encapsulation of what had gone wrong before and what was different now. She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, a promise and a new beginning. Their second wedding, held in Madison's garden as summer bloomed around them, bore little resemblance to their first lavish ceremony. No society photographers, no strategic guest list of business connections, no performative displays of wealth. Instead, they gathered only those who truly mattered, family who had supported them through difficult times, friends who had witnessed their growth separately and together, colleagues who had become genuine connections rather than useful contacts. Eliza, now 6 months old and able to sit up on her own, served as both flower girl and ring bearer, carried down the garden path by her adoring Aunt Olivia. Madison wore not a designer gown but a simple dress in soft blue that matched the sapphire on her finger. Nathaniel forgoed his usual power suit for linen pants and a light shirt that spoke of relaxed confidence rather than constructed authority. Their vows, spoken beneath an arch of summer roses, acknowledged both past failures and future promises. I vow to see you, truly see you, in all your complexity and brilliance, Nathaniel promised, his voice steady but his eyes revealing the depth of his emotion. To celebrate your successes as enthusiastically as my own. To remember that love isn't possession but freedom, that partnership doesn't mean sameness but complementary strength. Madison, holding his hands as butterflies danced among the garden blooms, offered her own truth. I vow to bring my whole self to this marriage, not a diminished version shaped by fear or expectation. To speak my truth even when it's difficult. To remember that vulnerability isn't weakness but the courage to be fully known. To build with you a home where Eliza learns that love should always make you more yourself, never less. As the simple gold bands were exchanged, Madison having insisted on symbols less ostentatious than their first platinum and diamond wedding set, Nathaniel added one unscripted promise. And I vow to remember, every day, that this second chance is the greatest gift I've ever received, one I'll never take for granted. The reception that followed, held in the same garden as twilight softened the summer heat, felt more like a family gathering than a formal celebration. Tables scattered beneath string lights, children including Eliza passed from lap to lap, conversation and laughter flowing as naturally as the champagne. Madison found herself watching Nathaniel throughout the evening, struck by the transformation evident in how he moved through the gathering. Where once he would have worked the room strategically, mentally cataloging useful connections, now he engaged genuinely with each person. Listening intently to Olivia's husband describe his latest woodworking project, getting down on the grass to help Madison's nephew retrieve a lost toy, laughing unreservedly at stories shared by friends who had known them through their worst times. Later, as the party continued around them, Madison and Nathaniel slipped away to check on Eliza, who had finally succumbed to sleep in a portable crib set up in Madison's home office. They stood together in the doorway, watching their daughter's peaceful breathing. 1 year ago today, Nathaniel whispered, careful not to wake the baby. I stormed into your house convinced you were hiding a man from me. Madison smiled at the memory that once would have been painful but now seemed like the necessary beginning of their journey back to each other. Instead, I was hiding a baby from you. The best secret anyone's ever kept from me, he acknowledged, slipping his arm around her waist. Though I'm glad we don't have secrets between us anymore. Madison leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of the man who had once seemed so emotionally unreachable now fully present beside her. Who would have thought that day would lead to this? That your arrogant accusations would somehow end with us remarried, raising our daughter together. Not me, Nathaniel admitted. I was too blinded by my own ego to see the possibility. But some part of me must have known what I was really looking for when I showed up at your door that morning. And what was that? Madison asked, turning in his arms to face him. Home, he said simply. Not a house or property, but the feeling I only ever found with you, even when I didn't know how to honor it properly. The word resonated through Madison's chest. Home, what they had created together this second time. Not the showcase their first shared house had been, designed to impress others, but a genuine sanctuary where both could be fully themselves. A burst of laughter from the garden reminded them of the celebration continuing outside. Madison took Nathaniel's hand, the new wedding band still unfamiliar against her fingers. We should get back to our guests. In a minute, he said, drawing her closer. I just want to remember this moment. The three of us, our family, our new beginning. As they rejoined their celebration under the summer stars, Madison reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the controlling husband and diminished wife they had once been, through the painful separation that had allowed them both to grow, to the shocking reunion catalyzed by their daughter's birth. It hadn't been an easy path, nor a straight one. But standing beside the man Nathaniel had become, watching him interact with the people she loved, Madison felt certainty settle in her heart. Some journeys weren't meant to be completed alone. Some storms came not to destroy but to clear away what wasn't meant to last, making space for something stronger to grow in its place. And sometimes, the person who once broke your heart could be the very one to help you build a life more beautiful than you had imagined possible. If you both were brave enough to try again, wiser for the breaking. If this story of finding strength and redemption touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more timeless love tales with Mr. Harrison. What story would you like to hear next?